Welcome to the Cedar Park United podcast. This week, worship leader Ian Fraser, in conversation with Montreal-based jazz pianist Taurey Butler, explores the relationship between jazz music and spirituality. If Jesus had been a musician, Ian's pretty sure he would have played jazz. Why? Keep listening to find out.
Well, it's good to be here today, and it's especially good to be here with Taurey, a musician I've heard a number of times in a number of different places, and always love listening to. You have an amazing touch that is just wonderful. So thank you for being here and being part of this. And we're going to talk a little bit about jazz and how it can be a conduit for our spirituality, or how spirituality can be a conduit for jazz, if you like. So I just thought I'd ask you a little bit and have a conversation with you to begin, if that's okay. Tell me about what jazz, in a sense, means to you and why it's special. How did you get into it?
Well, for me, I think jazz has allowed me to be expressive musically, and allowed me to tap into creativity in a way, because I started off with classical music, but learning jazz has just opened up the door, and it's kind of ironic because I have a greater appreciation of classical music because of my jazz studies. Yeah. I find that interesting. Yeah. I can understand more about the music I studied for classical through studying jazz, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, very cool. I'm not a musician, anything but. And sometimes I must say, when I listen to jazz, it just sounds like a whole bunch of random music coming at me, notes that are kind of all dispersed all over the place. And yet, I do understand that it has a structure to it, that it is based on certain rhythms and ways of playing. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that functions?
I'm so glad you used that example, because I have a way I explain jazz and what you said about it sounding chaotic, because I compare often improvisation in jazz to speaking a language. And the important points about that is you start off, you speak a language when you're young and you're learning. You speak the language before you actually learn about grammar, learn about the alphabet, and music is similar in that sense, where you do music, but then you understand more about it after. And of course, if you listen to someone in a foreign language, it's going to sound like you characterize it as a bunch of chaos. Someone who doesn't understand Chinese listens to Chinese people's, listen to someone speak Chinese, and they're like, I don't understand these sounds. This is absurd to me. But then, or like me coming from the States and coming to Montreal, when I would hear French, like, what? Some words are familiar, but I'm just confused. But then you learn the language, and then, okay, there's a lot of beauty in what appeared to be chaos at the beginning. And I think jazz is the same way. Once you understand the principles of where the improvisation is coming, then it becomes even more beautiful to you.
Super. So would it be true that most jazz musicians, at least, are really, like you in classical music, are based in music theory and music traditions that have existed long before jazz ever came on the scene?
You don't have to be, but most of the ones that I really enjoy listening to have some strong fundamental theoretical base in music.
Super.
And my greatest idol, Oscar Peterson, is another example of that. And as well as Oliver Jones, too, another idol of mine, here in Montreal. They had extensive classical training before they got into the jazz Or I don't know if it's before, but definitely that's a strong part of their foundation.
Right, right, yeah. When we were talking the other day, you quoted Branford Marsalis as saying, you got to know the rules to break the rules. And I started looking and realized that, in fact, Picasso had a very similar kind of saying as it related to art. Namely, he said, you have to learn the rules as a pro in order to break them as an artist. Would that be true for how you see jazz?
I think what's been interesting, too, as I've gotten older, is to see the connection between music and other art forms in life in general. And that seems to be one thing that's pretty consistent is you got to know what you're doing so you can, take adventure and take a risk. A risk without preparation is just not a good, that's trouble.
Chaos, as you said.
That's calling your family for bail money.
Super, thank you. The way I want to segue is to say that sometimes I have thought that if Jesus had been a musician, he would have played jazz. Now, obviously, he would have been about 1,800 years ahead of his time because jazz is a relatively late development in the music world. But by that, I mean the way in which I read him approaching faith, approaching life, approaching human relationships in particular, is somewhat the way in which jazz musicians approach their music. Namely, they learn the rules so that they can break them. We like life to be predictable. We like God to be predictable, and in most ways, life is and God is. And so as we gather, we continue on this planet's journey around our star, the sun, one more time, as has happened in a predictable way for millions of years. And after we are gone, we'll continue for more millions of years. Seasons follow seasons, follow seasons, follow seasons. Sunset follows sunrise, follows sunset, follows sunrise. Most of the fundamental things that we need for human existence are, in fact, very predictable. So predictable, in fact, that we don't think about them because we don't need to think about them. And so in the same way, it's entirely likely that all of us here will experience breath 20,000 times today. Most of us will experience our heart beating 100,000 times today. And unless there is something that breaks that quotidian rhythm, then we don't think about it because we don't have to. But if we do, if that break occurs, then suddenly it gathers all of our attention because something serious may be at risk. Otherwise, it just happens. And my guess is that for most of us today, we had given no thought to our breath or to our heart, to our pulse, until we gathered for our centering time today. If I could quote one of the great philosophers of our time, Homer Simpson, in an episode from The Simpsons from a few years ago, in one of those unlikely plots that seem to be there every time you watch a show, he is sent, of all things, as a missionary to some isolated island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And while he's there, he helps to build a church. And when it's finished, he stands back and he looks at this church and he says, I don't know much about God, he said, but we should have built a pretty nice cage for him. And that happens, I think, when we put God into a cage of predictability, where everything is set and nothing is going to change. We can think that God is stuck, imprisoned in a cage of rules and regulations by which God acts and by which we are urged to act. universal truths that are always true in every situation, in every time. And certainly we need stability, we need predictability. And yet so many parts of our lives are not. They're unstable. They're unpredictable. We do not know and cannot know what any given day is going to provide. And when something happens that we hadn't expected, we wonder whether we have the tools at our hands in order to deal with them. Something that the rules that we thought were always in place and find no longer are. Now, we create ourselves lots of rules and laws, and I think we in part do that to keep the unpredictable at arm's length. We do it because we need to find ways to order our lives, order our society. And so we know that red light means stop, green light means go. And most of us just do exactly what that says. Until somebody doesn't. And when that happens, horns blare, brakes get stomped on, accidents happen, chaos breaks out. But sometimes rules need to be broken. So a young child falls and hits the back of her head on cement. And that child is carefully put into the back seat of a car, and the driver takes off as fast as possible to get to the hospital, running through red lights if necessary, because the driver knows that the child's well-being is more important than keeping some stupid rule. And I think this is the world we live in, a world of rules, a world of rules that we seek to maintain until we don't, because something else becomes more important. It's, I think, the world that we live in, and as I read the gospel stories, it's also the world in which Jesus lived, and probably everybody in the world in between those times as well. We heard Richard reading a series of interchanges today from the gospel between Jesus and religious authorities. Authorities for whom maintaining those religious rules was more important, perhaps, than the people that those very rules were designed to help, to support, to guide, to give direction to. But Jesus thought and acted differently than those authorities, and that's why he kept getting in so much trouble. At least one of the reasons, among several. He was somebody who broke the rules. He hung out with the wrong people instead of with the right ones. He enjoyed himself, did not at all mind being part of a party, eating and dining and drinking and enjoying the conversations, giving full joy to the moment at hand, rather than always being serious and sober and somber. He walked through the fields with his disciples on the Sabbath and ate grain when he wasn't supposed to. And he healed somebody on that Sabbath, because apparently he was supposed to check his calendar, see what day of the week it was, and tell the man to come back the next day. But that's not the way he acted. Now, it wasn't that Jesus was opposed to law, to rules. Quite the contrary. He was steeped in Jewish tradition. He sat at the feet of the elders at the temple in Jerusalem when he was young. He learned Torah. He embodied Torah. He followed Torah. He taught Torah. He quoted Torah. It was deep, deep within him. But he understood Torah not to be the goal to be fulfilled in life, to show one's righteousness, but rather the means to an end. The end being fulfilling that dream of God, of a world in which there was love and justice and mercy and kindness and hope and peace. That was the world. And circumstances often required that the law be interpreted differently for different people at different times with different challenges. Red lights were important until they weren't, and then you drove right through them. So he took those rules and he played improv on them. That was the whole point of it. The rules were the starting point. But the question he asked was, well, how does that law get lived out at this time, in this circumstance, with this person? Is the Sabbath given as a law so that there simply be no work whatsoever that went on as a complete time of rest? Or was it intended to be a time when one could put aside the daily labors of heavy labor that so many of his contemporaries knew in order to focus and to see something different? Was it simply a cessation of work for the sake of cessation of work? Or could it also be a time when one ate when one was hungry and when one did good rather than doing nothing? Am I on this earth, he asked, for the insiders who already have a sense that they are part of God's realm? Or for these other folk who think that they've been expelled, who are on the outside, but who deeply know that they are cared for and appreciated and loved by God? You have heard it said, he said, then quoted Torah, this in the Sermon on the Mount, but now I say to you. So here we have it. Tradition followed by improv. Tell me, he said, was humanity made for Sabbath law, or was Sabbath law made for humanity? Tradition, improv. I didn't come to do away with the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them, he said. And not a single dot of that law will be changed until it is fulfilled. But by fulfillment, he didn't mean simply strict adherence to what was on the page, but rather asking how those laws could be lived out in new ways, for new circumstances and new people. So he meant giving the law as its rightful place as a foundation, but then riffing on it, as he recognized was important. If you have time, I encourage you to read through the Sermon on the Mount this week. And do it with that in mind. See how many times he's quoting the tradition and what he's changing in order to make it alive for the people of his time. And so it begins with the tradition that has been passed down through all of these centuries, all of these generations, knowing it deeply, not so we can pass a memorization test or prove ourselves to be righteous in any way, but rather as that foundation from which improv can come, so that the tradition can be broken open in the right ways. And as Taurey says, that's what needs to happen in the music. You've got to start with what's there, what's known, because without it, it becomes chaos untethered, if you like, floating around with no base to it whatsoever. And that's true of all kinds of improv. It's true for improv in music, improv in art, improv in theater, and improv in life as well. So as followers of Jesus, let's take our tradition, both the one that he inherited and the one that he created, take that wisdom and steep ourselves in it so that we feel free, not burdened by that, but rather quite the opposite, freed to find ways to express it, to live it, to embody it, to create it in the ways that are not simply knee-jerk reactions, repetitions of what's going on, but respond to the needs that we see, the needs in those unpredictable times of our lives, and the needs of the people we meet around us, and in our world as a whole. Amen. Now let's take some time to consider the offerings that we have to give. Offerings of, again, our treasures, our time, our talents. And thinking about this this week, I remembered something I learned from a church consultant many, many years ago who said there are two ways to give. And he was talking specifically about financial giving, but I think it applies to all that we have to offer. He said there are two kinds of givers. He said there are marathoners, people who plod their way along through life and give regularly and certainly and predictably. They're the ones who give week by week by week, month by month by month, whatever it is that they have to offer. Those are the marathoners. And then he said there are sprinters. And sprinters are the ones who respond to a particular situation and do so with generosity. Whether, again, it's the skills they have to offer or the time they have to offer or the finances that they have to offer. But particular situations need those sprinters in order for them to happen. So today, as we consider the offerings that we have to give, maybe let's think about the sprinters, because there's the improv people. And as we listen to Taurey, perhaps think of one way in which you can be a sprinter, particular need that you're being called upon to respond to.
Thank you for listening to the Cedar Park United podcast. If it inspired you, or comforted you, or even ruffled your feathers in a good way, please consider leaving a positive rating or subscribing to help others find their way here too. It matters.